Gaming Morning Show continues. Thanks for being with us on Tuesday. We bring in our two interview subjects this morning. This is JT Torres and Justin Peterson. Justin's having some camera problems, so you get to look at my avatar in place of Justin, which, according to Justin, is our loss because Justin is quite a fantastic-looking human being. So I apologize to you, chat. We can't bring that to you. However, we are going to talk about some discussions about video games in learning. I hope that's one of our takeaways. That's pretty okay, Justin, is that we missed out on getting a chance to see your face today.
It's okay. It's all right. I'm a pretty man, but we'll live.
And JT is with us as well. Both are working on a book around this idea of video games aiding learning. I think that's what I want to start with. Is this concept that I read in your piece, JT, that was in Inside Higher Ed. Give us an idea why video games are so good at teaching learning in ways that most virtual classes, I guess, maybe haven't seemed to master yet.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having us on. This is amazing. But to answer your question, so my specific position here at Quinnipiac University is to direct teaching and learning at the university. So I'm constantly thinking about how do we change things about the ways we bring students into a classroom and the way we inspire them, excite them, and engage them in various learning experiences. Video games, as you can tell from the article, is where I draw for my inspiration, and not just inspiration, but actual scientific research that is finding video games just do a really, really good job of teaching many different things. If you think about the cognitive price of admission for any new video game, you're having to learn everything from button mapping to what different NPCs do, to how you interact with the world. And at the same time, you have to be engaged. Compared with a book, and I'm not casting shade on any books. I love books. I have a bunch of them that I read. All I have to do is figure out how to turn a page. You know what I'm saying? And when I'm watching a movie, all I have to do is figure out the remote control and how to stream Netflix. But with video games, there's a pretty steep price of admission. Every new game, for the most part, has its own system that you have to learn and you have to master. And it's done without any real formal teaching, right? It's guided learning, which is amazing. Even games like Dark Souls, which are notorious for being super difficult, has a built-in learning system where once you learn the system itself, you become a master and you can advance all the way through to 50, 70 hours of engagement. Largely, that's because of immersion. And what does it mean to be immersed in a situation? And it's also about the agency given to the players, right? So if we think about players and students as synonyms for each other, in a traditional classroom, unfortunately, like I love universities and I work in one, but unfortunately, traditionally, students are positioned as passive receptors of knowledge, right? They sit in the chair, they're maybe taking notes, but there's not a lot of activity and engagement going on. And so we don't really need so much of that direct lecture style instruction if we can just think about experiences and environments where students are acting as players and rather than just being a passive audience are actually co-authoring the story of their learning.
Absolutely. I think that and judging by our chat, and this is something a lot of our folks are very passionate about, to kind of think about the book that you're working on. It focuses on applying interactive narrative principles across various learning experiences. So what are some examples of how this could possibly look in action?
Yeah, so what video games do is they invite a lot of opportunities for player choice, right? So gone are the days of the straightforward side scroller, right? Like players can choose a variety of choices that they can make, whether it's aesthetic choices in designing their character, or strategic choices in choosing, do they want to be a rogue? Do they want to be a tank? How do they divvy up their stats? So there's just a lot of choice going on. So players get to have that agency and get to have that control. They can also, as we were talking about earlier, decide on the course of the narrative, whether they're choosing and branching storylines like a Telltale game, or are they actually making active decisions to pursue a certain path and maybe just creating the majority of their story in their head, like in an RPG. With learning, with classroom formal learning, I'm thinking about how we can create more opportunities for student choice. What does it look like for them to design their own assignments, to design their own learning experiences, to choose research topics? So how can we break down these principles and kind of move away from the tech? Because I think what scares most people is the technology of video games. When I went into my PhD, and my primary interest is I wanted to just do a formal study on how learning occurs in video games. And one of the immediate barriers was getting access to video games, right? Like a lot of developers, they didn't want to share. I approached some developers,
Mhm.
and they didn't want to necessarily share games on a wide scale level, so I can like study 50 to 100 different students and see how they're encountering. So technology is a huge barrier. So then my next step was, all right, well, let me just break out what are these principles, and let me do it without the technology and create a live action game, kind of like an escape room, a little bit like how do we turn classes into escape rooms, not literally, and give options where students get to choose their strategies, choose their engagement, choose how they're participating, and have that control. So I've really been focusing on the level of freedom and agency that players have, and how that can transfer into learning environments like schools.
And Justin, I know that you have a background both obviously co-researching this book and co-authoring this book, but also in campus living and residential life too. I'm curious, like holistically, have you seen ways that like this kind of spans both the academic side and of course the residence side?
Yeah, so that's sort of one of the things that I'm trying to view this through. One of the lenses I'm trying to look at this is not just in the classroom. Um, I supervise about 14 different individuals, RAs, whose job is to understand policy, be able to address policy, and facilitate really difficult conversations with residents. And nowadays, you're looking at a lot of barriers for that, a lot of incoming students with really mental health issues who just don't know how to interact. They're just having a really hard time. And so it's our job to really try to connect people to understand our resources. So to do that, um, there's traditionally ways where we can sit and, like JT's saying, talk at people in a classroom and say, hey guys, these are the policies. But trying to branch that out into interactive narrative and trying to find ways for people to engage, I found a lot of success in trying to restructure some of these trainings around concepts that come from, let's say, D&D or Pathfinder, or some of these other games that we may play. So one of the things that I've done is to help teach this during COVID, we couldn't necessarily have a bunch of people gather in a large group and walk through the hallways and kind of simulate how they would be interacting with people. So I kind of piecemealed this D&D-esque type game together with many Legos and maps that I had, and bought some of these walls and constructed what the living area and community looked like from a top-down view. So then I could work with smaller groups and say, okay, pick your Lego character and let's put them on this map and roll a d20 die. And okay, so your roll's high enough that you hear some bottles clinking and people talking like they're having a party behind the door, right? So this kind of created this fun game where not only were the scenarios kind of new to them, but much like a dungeon master role, they were new to me. So it kept me entertained and engaged because I didn't necessarily know how these scenarios going to unfold. But that helped us run into roadblocks, much like we do in real life, where this job isn't necessarily something that uh, you're going to be throwing curveballs a lot. So that kind of helped with people understanding where they would be standing, what they needed to say, fault that maybe would come up in interacting with somebody, or problems that they could then, when they were in that situation, have that actual hands-on training. And I think that links back to what JT was talking about in his article about handing people pieces of information that they turn around and immediately use, much like in video games like Dark Souls or something like that, when you learn a button and you're going to be given an enemy right away in a tutorial where you're going to need to block or roll. So you're applying that in real time. So I want to look at that through, not only my job, but then branching that out and taking some of these concepts and how that would work with, let's say, parenting, right? Like my daughter learned to read from Minecraft because I was tired of trying to read every single word that she wanted to hover over. And that was motivation. I think we all, do you guys remember? I don't know if you guys had this, but in school, we had to sit down and type out basically to get faster for typing, right? Like you might have
Absolutely.
had that.
Yep.
I remember them telling us, and they may have told you the same thing. Hey guys, you may make more money one day as like a secretary or something if you can type faster, which meant absolutely nothing to me as a student. I was like, that means nothing. Now I'm playing World of Warcraft later on and realizing that I can't get into certain dungeons or do things unless I type faster to communicate with people. So now my motivation changes. So instead of making money, I can beat an effing dragon. That's the motivation for me.
So Caleb was on the same bandwidth as me. Said, "Oh, Mavis Beacon." Yep, that was the thing back in the day. But I agree because I'm not a money motivated person. I'm a creative motivated. I like seeing a vision push through, right? And so that speaks to me for sure. I think video games certainly would speak to me in that regard when you use them in the educational realm. So we'll keep a look for your book. When's the target date? Do you think it'll be released?
I think we're aiming for the end of this semester, right, JT?
Yeah, or next semester, we have some work to do on things. So yeah, next year, I mean, we should see a release. But I just wanted to say one thing really quickly about what I'm talking about is I think the big key is the identity that's being formed, and that identity could be very fictional. Again, like an RPG, you're assuming an identity. But I wonder, this is a research question I have not explored, so I don't have real data for this. I'm just asking, how often when you're playing a video game, do you actually become conscious of the fact that you are playing a video game versus the fact that you are your character or you are in that world? You know, that flow theory, that being in the zone, right? That happens more often, and this is all assumptions. I don't know because I haven't done a study on this. That happens more often with video games, at least in my experience, than it does in a classroom where I'm very much aware that I'm a student and I'm being talked at by a professor, right? And it's also interesting when you see some of the complaints that people have of particular video games. And a very typical common complaint is the tutorial lasts too long, right? I see lots of reviews about games and they just complain that, you know, there's too much hand-holding, too much tutorial. All college, I mean, all K through 12 to college is tutorial. When do we actually get to play the thing we are doing? And so, yeah, identity is so important to that. Like, how do we get people to see themselves as beyond just someone trying to make money, but yeah, I'm saving the world from a dragon. Or I'm fighting Venom, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's JT Torres, Justin Peterson joining us on Gaming Morning Show. You can read the article from Inside Higher Ed, What Video Games Can Teach Us About Teaching, via the link that we provided in the chat. We'll look for your book, obviously, next year, and maybe we'll follow up, too. Once it's released, we can get a chance to talk to you. That was a really fun insight into what you're working on, and we appreciate you taking the time to join Gaming Morning Show this morning.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys so much, and happy National Bouillabaisse Day.
Oh, gosh. Bouillabaisse. Go get some fish stew, everybody. I love it.